Hi, it's Mrs. Scarple, and in this video we're going to continue to solve multi-step equations, and we're also going to take a look at translating sentences into equations and solving those. Now you may notice here that I have the exact same equation and I have method 1 and method 2. Now it doesn't mean that there are two specific types of methods that can be used. What I'm going to show you is that when it comes to multi-step equations, there's not necessarily one specific way to solve every single equation. We can solve many equations more than one way and ultimately get the same result. So I'm just going to show you that with these two equations, I can solve them different ways and end up with the same result. And you and your friend may do the same thing. You may solve it one way, your friend may solve it another way. And just because your friend solves it different than you doesn't mean your friend did it wrong. It just means they did it differently. So I know that I've had students in the past that would say if they see 2 times 1 minus x plus 3 equals negative 9, that the very first thing we should do is distribute the 2. So I'm just going to go ahead with what I know students have told me in the past, and that is to go ahead and distribute. So 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times negative x is negative 2x. Add the 3 equals negative 9. And then we have like terms, the 2 and the 3 that can be combined. So that becomes 5 minus 2x equals negative 9. Now our whole goal is to get the x by itself, so we need to undo the 5, and because 5 is positive, we're going to subtract 5 from both sides. That leaves us with negative 2x equals negative 14, and then divide both sides by negative 2, and we have x equals positive 7, because a negative divided by a negative is positive. Now, my second method, I'm going to take a look at this, and I have 2 times some value, that's what the parentheses represents, is a value, plus 3 equals negative 9. And I'm just going to ignore that I have 2 times an expression for now, and I'm not going to distribute. I'm going to, as I said, treat this as this is some value. So I want to get this multiplication isolated, and to do that I'm going to subtract 3 from each side. So that's going to leave me with 2 times 1 minus x equals negative 12. Then I want to undo the multiplication that's happening here. And the reason I can say that I want to do that is because in order to do that I would divide by 2, and negative 12 is easily divided by 2 and gives me an integer. It doesn't give me a decimal, doesn't give me a fraction. So I'm going to go ahead, divide both sides by 2, and that leaves me with the expression 1 minus x equals negative 6. So now I can isolate x by subtracting 1 from each side, and that leaves me with a negative x equals negative 7. And if I remember that this is like saying negative 1x, divide both sides by negative 1, and I have x equals 7. Now, assuming I didn't make any mistake as I solved this with either method, this should be enough to tell me that, well, 7 is my answer. But let's just go ahead and check here real quick. If I substitute 7 in for the x, so 1 minus 7 plus 3, is that going to equal negative 9? Well, 1 subtracts 7 is negative 6. And then we will have to add 3. We're checking to see if that equals negative 9. So we have negative 12 plus 3. Question is, does that equal negative 9? Negative 12 plus 3 is negative 9. Negative 9 does in fact equal negative 9. I'm going to put a T here for true. So that means x equals 7 is the correct solution to this equation. And as you can see, there wasn't one specific way to solve it. So I want you to keep in mind as you're solving multi-step equations that just because you solve it one way and your friend solves it another way does not mean that one way is better than another. So what I would like you to do now is solve these two equations. You're going to solve A for D and you're going to solve B for X. Now that you've had a chance to solve these equations, this is how I would go about solving these. Before I do any distributing or anything, I'm going to get the multiplication by itself on A and subtract the 5 so that I have 10 equals 4 times 2D subtract 3. Now it looks like I could divide by 4, but if I look on the left hand side of the equal sign, 10 doesn't divide by 4 real easily. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and distribute the 4. So now my equation is 10 equals 8D minus 12. And then add 12 to each side, and we have 22 equals 8D, and then we will need to divide by 8 to isolate the D. Now 22 is not evenly divisible by 8, and I'd rather, and I know Mrs. Bierman would rather not have you leave answers as decimals either. So we're going to get in the habit of simplifying our fractions as improper fractions. We're not going to write them as mixed numbers. So a common factor of 22 and 8 is 2. So this answer will reduce to 11 over 4 equals D. And if we check, it'll be a little bit messy. Actually, it won't be too bad. I'll show you real quick how we can check this. 15 equals 5 plus 4 times 2 times 11 fourths minus 3. We're checking, does 15 equal that? So we have 5 plus 4, and let's simplify what's in parentheses first. So we have 2 times the 11 fourths. So when I multiply here, you need to keep in mind that the 2 is like 2 over 1. And when you multiply fractions, you multiply straight across. So that's 22 over 4 minus 3. Now, rather than get a common denominator and combine these, which could look a little bit messier, I'm at this point going to go ahead and distribute the 4 through. And the reason I'm going to do that is because when I take 4 times 22, I get 88, and I can divide 88 by 4. So when you take a whole number times a mixed number like this, you take the whole number times the numerator, so 4 times 22 is 88, divided by 4 is 22, and 4 times the negative 3 is minus 12. So that's what we'd have here, and this is being added to 5, and our question is, will that equal 15? So 5 plus 22 is 27, subtract 12, is 15. That is true, so we have solved this correctly, and 11 fourths is our answer. Let's take a look at B. I see that I have 5 minus 3 in parentheses. There's really no reason to distribute 2x if you can simplify what's in parentheses first. So let's rewrite this as 2x times 2, subtract 3x equals 5. And then go ahead and take 2x times 2, which is 4x, subtract 3x equals 5, and 4x subtract 3x is 1x, or just x, equals 5. So let's check our work. We end up with 2 times 5 times 2, because 5 minus 3 is 2. Subtract 3 times 5, and is that going to equal 5? 2 times 5 is 10, times 2 is 20, minus 15. Is that going to equal 5? And we end up with 5 equals 5. That is true. So our answer is x equals 5.